Welcome to Martha Runs the World, a podcast with a new take on running, fitness, and all things health-oriented. I'm Martha Hughes, your host, and each week I present a new topic that is of interest to all runners. Welcome to episode 227 of Martha Runs the World. Thank you so much for joining me. I always appreciate it. You know I do. This week is a special episode where I talk about the turbulent and fascinating life of America's greatest athlete. He was a runner, but he was also did so many other sports. Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe was the greatest athlete the United States has ever known. He was incredible in a variety of sports. In nearly any sport he tried, he excelled. He could play football, baseball, basketball, track and field. He could ice skate. He could ballroom dance. He could hunt and fish, but he lived in a time of conflict. He was a Native American and from a home life that was not ideal, and his story needs to be told, so I thought I would share that with you today. Jim's father, Hiram Thorpe, had 5 wives in his life and lots of children, 18 in total. His third wife, Charlotte, had 11 of them. They were born in the Indian Territory of Oklahoma. Only 5 of those 11 made it to adulthood. It was a terrible time to be born in that era. She had a pair of boys born on the Sac and Fox Reservation, about 16 miles northeast of Shawnee, Oklahoma. And they were born on May 22nd of 1887. The boys were named Charles and James. They were also given Indian names. James's name was Wathohook, meaning path lit by lightning. He wasn't named for his future athletic prowess, however, but for the lightning storm that was happening during his birth. Unfortunately, Charles died at age 9 of typhoid fever. Hiram wandered in between women and left Jim's mother for a younger woman. Jim's mother, Charlotte, died in childbirth later on when Jim was in his teens. Hiram also passed away from a snake bite when Jim was 16. Jim had ancestry in not only the Sac and Fox tribes, but also in the Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Menominee, and French and English. He told people he was 5/8 Indian, or Native American. He did say Indian, though. He did use those words. The late 1880s was a turbulent time in Oklahoma. The General Allotment Act of 1887, known as the Dawes Act, granted that every adult Indian living on a reservation would be granted 160 acres of land. But the problem with it is that these allotments would be held in trust until the Indians could earn their way into citizenship, right? As if they weren't already there, by demonstrating their ability to fit into the white man's world. I know, this is how it was, though. This is how it was. Can't change history. The land would be sold, and the proceeds would be given to the Indians, many times at a reduced rate. The Sac and Fox tribes had good reason not to trust this deal, obviously. More than 3/4 of the reservation was gone through this deal, so they really got screwed, if you want to be honest about it. When they were old enough, Jim and Charles were sent to the Sac and Fox boarding school near Stroud in Oklahoma. They were forbidden to speak their natural language and forced to speak English. The students hated the school because it was so structured and unlike living in the outside world that they were used to. Can't blame them. During the brothers' 3rd year, typhoid fever raged through the school and Charles passed away from it. James lost his best friend and part of himself. When he was older, Jim was sent to attend the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. It had been opened for 25 years previously and was a military installation with roots dating back to the Revolutionary War. Hiram had remarried, this time a white woman, and she and Jim didn't get along. So Hiram wanted to send him far away, just to have peace in the house. As I said, Jim's personal life, home life, was not a good situation. Even though Jim had never played football, Hiram told the school that he was good at it and Jim was packed and gone in no time. Carlisle was another school with rigid rules the students were not used to. Jim lived a life of hunting and fishing and being outside. And in Pennsylvania, he had to spend time inside unless he was playing sports. So he learned to play sports, and he learned to like it so he could be outside. Now, Pop Warner had started a football program there. Yes, the Pop Warner that has the football programs for schools, or whose name is on the football programs for kids now. He's not alive, obviously, but he has his name on them. And he left the school temporarily when Jim first started. Carlisle didn't place students in the grades that they should have, but they did it where they thought they belonged. Jim was 19, and he was in grade 9, which really bothered him. So he didn't pay much attention to school. All he wanted to do was play sports and be outside. Now, this story may or may not be true, but it's been told so many times that people actually think it's true. One day, Jim was walking from one building to the next wearing overalls. He watched the high jumpers on the track field, and most of the stories talking about it said the bar was at 5'9". One after the other, the school jumpers were trying to clear the bar, but none could. So Jim asked if he could try, and they said sure, laughing a little bit under their breath, and Jim tried it in one try, and he cleared it with little effort. But who knows if that's true or not. Now, after a little while, Pop Warner came back to Carlisle, and he is seen as a hero to Americans because he started football and he became a big college football coach and everything like that. But you might see him differently after I tell the story of Jim Thorpe. In 1906, football was quite a bit different than it is today. The helmets back then were made of very thin leather straps and weren't even mandatory. The game was very brutal, with head-to-head hits and lots of intense plays. There were lots of deaths and injuries in one year. They added up big time. Thorpe was a running back, but didn't see much playing time at first. And back then, the players on the field played both offense and defense. Can you imagine them doing that now? I don't think so. The team was called the Carlisle Indians, or Pop's Indians. And when they won, the newspapers in the area used headlines such as Carlisle Indians massacre whatever college they were playing, or things of that nature. It was very derogatory, and that went on throughout Thorpe's life. Everything was very racist and very derogatory towards Native Americans. The school football team made money, lots of money, because the team was really good. It made enough money to build Warner and his wife a beautiful new home and give each player bonus money. Yeah, they did kind of pay their players. This, of course, brought up questions about payouts to schools, students, and corruptions, but nobody said anything. It was pretty much hush-hush. Thorpe led the way in touchdowns. He scored 6 touchdowns in one game, making the score against Villanova 102-0. That's right, 102-0. He was pure muscle and could not only run, but took people down as he went. He was developing a reputation, and he was gathering crowds. People came to see him. For much of the year, Jim played football and baseball. In June of 1909, Jim went to play for the Eastern Carolina minor league baseball team, the Rocky Mount Railroaders. His arrival was hyped up in local papers for days. He was there for 2 seasons. There were lots of accusations and lies that came from that. Now, this is where a lot of Thorpe's problems in his life came up. The biggest lie was that, now minor league, they did get paid a small amount of money. Not much, but a small amount. The biggest lie about it came from Pop Warner, who said Jim had told them, the school, that he was going back to Oklahoma, back home. He knew fully well where Jim was going. Jim never hid his time in the minors. He never used an alias. He never lied. He never, ever hid anything about him playing in minor league baseball. And even though Jim was better at football or track, he felt that baseball was his way out. Being a poor kid, he didn't have a whole lot of options. So sports was really his only thing. And baseball, he felt, gave him the best chance of becoming somebody and not just staying in poverty his whole life. Now, the history of him playing professional baseball, even though it was hardly any money, would definitely come back to haunt him. And this part makes me angrier than most. I don't watch the Olympics anymore. I haven't for a long time because I find their constant hypocrisy is too much for me to handle. In this time in history, the U.S. Olympic Committee did not allow professional athletes to be in the Olympics. Other countries had no problem with this. You could be a pro in other countries and be in their Olympic team. That was not a problem. But in the U.S., they didn't allow it. That's why the U.S. lost so much in past years, because other teams would beat them because they had pros, but the U.S. didn't. It was ridiculous. Thank goodness that's changed. But I still don't watch it for other reasons. But this just made me so angry. Anyway, before he went off to the Olympics, and he did, he met Iva Margaret Miller at Carlisle. Iva was born in 1893 in Indian Territory. She was bright and the head of her class at Carlisle, and she was to become Jim's first wife. Now, Jim was chosen to go to the Olympics at Stockholm. There were 174 athletes, the best in amateur sports in the U.S. Thorpe had gotten on the team by winning 3 of the 5 pentathlon events. He was 3 times better than his closest competitor. He also competed in the decathlon, and he got gold medals in the pentathlon and the decathlon in Stockholm. Almost said Stockton. Sorry, Stockholm. All right. He was so far ahead of everybody else, he could have just competed by himself and won everything. That's how good he was. The biggest controversy of Thorpe's life started brewing in a small newspaper office in Massachusetts. Roy Ruggles Johnson worked at the Worcester Telegram and was the first writer to break the story. And the story read like this: Thorpe with professional baseball team, says Clancy. Southbridge, January 21st, 1913. That the great Jim Thorpe, the Sac and Fox Indian, world's amateur champion athlete, played professional baseball in the Carolina Association for 2 years is the statement made by Charles Clancy, manager of the Winston-Salem Association, who is passing the winter in Southbridge. Now, the story spread up and down the East Coast like wildfire. It was the biggest story around in sports. It is unlikely that the Carlisle school officials didn't know. Obviously, Pop Warner knew. They all knew. They were all in denial, though, because their livelihoods depended on not knowing. If they knew, they could all be found guilty and probably lose everything. While it was true that Thorpe had never pitched a game for Winston-Salem or played in any other position in that league, wrong team, wrong league. And Clancy was the manager, not the owner, so he wouldn't have paid Thorpe. It was a lie built on truths. So yes, everything he said was true, but it was still a lie. They all had so much to lose if they admitted to it. So they basically threw Thorpe under the bus so they could save their own butts. So sleazy, so smarmy, so scummy. Jim wrote to the Amateur Athletic Union admitting he was paid. But, I don't think he even wrote this because it didn't sound like something... questions arose as to who wrote the letter. There was a phrase at the end of it saying, I quote, I was simply an Indian schoolboy and did not know all about such things. That is not something that Thorpe would have ever written. He would have never said anything like that about himself. It definitely sounds like something that Warner would write for him. He would not have written that about himself. So there we go again. There's Pop Warner talking about the poor Indian. Lo, the poor Indian. Everything, it's so disgusting to me. And it's just this great man reduced to nothing because of Pop Warner. really comes down to him. All of this all comes down to him. Jim Thorpe was cut loose. He lost his trophies and medals as Warner saved himself. What's the most interesting part about this is the American public felt sympathy towards Thorpe and didn't think any of this should have happened. At the same time that all this was happening, Warner was trying to get a Major League Baseball contract for him. The New York Giants baseball team signed Jim Thorpe at a very high price as well. Baseball was probably his weakest sport. He was not a great baseball player. He was adequate, but he was not great like he was in football or track or even hunting or fishing or even ballroom dancing. He was a better ballroom dancer than he was a baseball player. He was not great as a rookie ball player. He had a .143 batting average. He got 5 hits, 1 home run, and 2 stolen bases. His novelty was wearing off with the crowds as well. But there was so much conflict with the press and in his personal life. How could he concentrate on baseball with all this other stuff going on? Meanwhile, all this stuff was going on. The truth was coming out about the Carlisle Academy. With all the nastiness going on, a petition was signed by 276 students that was sent to Congressman Arthur Ringwalt from a concerned teacher, and an investigation was started about the school. They discovered the school was led by inept leadership, including everything was subservient to football and athletics. It was also discovered that much of the funds of the school made from football, and they made a lot of money, was used for personal items. Sure, new school buildings were built, but Warner and his wife went on extravagant vacations, had new cars, and many other questionable items on his salary. As I said, this all leads back to Pop Warner. And there were hundreds of checks given outright to the football players, which included Thorpe, as well as many others. Keep in mind that most colleges give their top athletes gifts, but outright money? I don't think the officials would take too kindly to that. Warner was also harsh with the students, and they in turn were not fond of him. He berated them, yelled at them, and beat them. He would whip them and spank them, the investigations found. It was recommended to fire Pop Warner, but he quit before that could happen. As always, he took the coward's way out. He left to go to University of Pittsburgh, where he created a national championship team and was later inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. So I guess he didn't even get punishment for what he did to those poor students. That angers me. That really, really angers me. And of course, you've heard of his football camps for kids. So this great man who made these football camps had terrorized students and totally destroyed a young man's career. Absolutely did. Probably just hurt him for life, took advantage of him, and hurt our greatest athlete for life. That's what Pop Warner did. So history will not remember him kindly. Since his baseball career wasn't going anywhere, Jim signed up to be a coach at Pitt for the punters and kickers. He was always a better football player anyway than a baseball player. And in 1920, a small group of men met at Akron, Ohio, for what was to become the NFL. Thorpe was the league's first president. Since he wasn't into taking care of the finer details, such as the rules and regulations, he was more of the public figure of the league, rather than involved in setting the football's first set of rules. He was a really good public figure. People knew who he was, and he was really good for the league's presence. It was first known as the American Professional Football Association, and in 1922 it changed its name to the NFL. Thorpe was not perfect, no, but even though he had been married to Iva for many years and had children with her, he then became involved with a much younger woman named Frida. She would be his second wife. After a brief time as NFL president, Jim moved to Hollywood. They were going to make a movie about his life. It was going to be called The Red Son of Carlisle. He wanted a Native American to play his part, but Hollywood wanted a big star. And see, this difference mattered to him. Was kind of upset over that. I don't blame him, actually. He also found bit parts in several movies, including Always Kickin', Wagon Master, and Newt Rockney All-American. As an extra, he was paid $7.50 to $11 a day, depending on if there was a speaking part or not. At this time, his second wife, Frida, filed for divorce. He drank a lot, and if he drank too much, he kind of got a little wild, and maybe he was too hard to control. And it would upset Frida, and she couldn't take it anymore, so she did divorce him and leave him. Patricia Gladys Woodbury Askew became his third wife, and wow, was she different than the first two. His first two wives thought that they could reform him. They thought they could help him. They thought they could help him with his alcoholism. They were much younger than he was. Well, no, Iva wasn't that younger, but they were younger. They were more naive, more hopeful. Patsy wasn't younger like the other two, though. She was well-traveled, as they used to say back then, and she was 47 years old, so she definitely wasn't young. She was born in Missouri and was a band leader for many years, playing piano with her band and traveling all over the country, so she had seen a lot. She met Jim in Illinois in a bar and got married after they ran into each other a few times. She herself was a hard drinker, and unlike the other two wives, she was very involved in her husband's career, and sometimes too involved, as it turned out. And not for the better, either. Patsy and Jim traveled all over the country to try to get Jim work. They traveled to Florida so that Jim could work in real estate, but like everything else Jim tried, that didn't work out. He just couldn't stay in any jobs for long. It just didn't last. He just wasn't happy with anything. They went back to California when the word was that his movie was finally going to be made. But there was Patsy. She was so aggressive when it came to Jim and towards him. She was condescending and verbally abusive towards him. And towards the filmmakers. She didn't have any idea how to treat other people. She was hurtful towards Jim. She would scream at him and yell at him and put him down. But she was also really terrible towards MGM. And she frustrated the filmmakers so much that they put the movie on the shelf and said, forget about it. Now, someone else took the movie and bought rights from MGM and made the movie without her because no one wanted to deal with her because she was so horrible to get along with. Really, that's the story of her life with the Thorpes, with Jim Thorpe and his family, is that nobody wanted to deal with her because she was just so awful. And she was just not a nice person. Poor Jim. I mean, she just was not good for him at all. And the movie did come out in 1952. It was Jim Thorpe, All-American. And it had a huge opening. Over 3,000 theaters and drive-ins showed it when it first came out. Now, Jim had 3 heart attacks in the last 10 years of his life. And his third one was fatal. On March 28, 1953, he passed away. But that is not the end of the story. Jim's children wanted to lay his body to rest in Oklahoma, in his home in Oklahoma. That is where it belongs. That is where he wanted to be laid to rest. He told them that's where he wanted to be laid to rest. He never wrote it down because that's not the kind of guy he was, but he had told his children that is where he once wanted to be laid to rest. But Patsy, oh no, she had different ideas. As always, she had a money-making venture in mind. She wanted to bring his body to Pennsylvania, of all places, in a town he had never been to before, never heard of before. She had made a deal with this tiny community of Mock Chunk. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in Pennsylvania. She made a deal with them that if she buried him there and built a Jim Thorpe Memorial and Museum, they would change the name of the town to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Can you believe it? And guess what? They did. They did. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So of all the gall, the kids, his whole family, anyone, they wanted to bring him to Pennsylvania to lay him to rest in a reservation there in Indian Territory. And she just wanted to make this whole town in his name for her sake. I don't know what makes me madder, the Olympics or her. God, this poor man, our greatest athlete, was abused by so many people. And his children were enraged, and they took her to the court, and they lost. So Jim Thorpe is buried in an area he had never visited, never heard about, never had any inkling towards, thanks to Patsy. Her greedy meddling followed him past the grave. Unbelievable. In 1983, the Olympic Committee restored his medal with replicas. Whoop-de-doo. 30 years after his death. Well, thanks loads. They ruled that the stripping of the medals fell outside the 30 required days and therefore should never have happened in the first place. My God, you guys are crooked. You guys are just horrible. If you weren't disgusted by the Olympics before this, I hope you are by now. It took until 2022 to restore him as the only champion of the pentathlon and the decathlon of the Stockholm Olympics. It might as well be the Stockton because it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Of the Stockholm Olympics. They took it away under false premise in the first place anyway. How dare they? He is in both the Pro Football and College Football Hall of Fames, and a poll in 2000 by ABC Sports voted him the greatest athlete of the 20th century. He's the greatest athlete ever, as far as I'm concerned. Now, much of the information I gathered for this episode is from the book by David Moranis, Path Lit by Lightning, and I urge you, I highly, highly recommend that you read it. And I'll have a link on Amazon if you would like to read it, because it's worthwhile. It's a very thick book, lots of information, lots more information than my tiny little podcast. But I picked up some of the highlights and lowlights. Yes, lots of lowlights. There's a lot more in it. I mean, it goes into so much more detail about everything that happened in his life, really everything. And I know you'll want to read it. It's a story that needs to be told, and he tells it just great, and his writing is terrific. But yeah, his life, I mean, so many sad things, so many outrageous things that should have never happened. He was a kind soul with a big heart, it seemed, and just people took advantage of it because some people are like that, and some people do that. But he was our greatest athlete. I hope you remember him and just at least learn something today, because I learned something reading about him and finding out information about this episode. He was pretty incredible. All right, so that is today's episode, and I hope you are doing well, and I hope you got your runs in. I'm getting my walks in. I'm getting there, closer and closer, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. The website is martharunstheworld.com, and if you want to email me, it's martharunstheworld@gmail.com. And until next week, let's tie up our shoelaces and go for a run.